Hello, everyone. My guest today is my longtime friend, Bishop E.W. Jackson from Chesapeake, Virginia. He has been a bold witness for Christ and standing for righteousness and conservative values in our country for several decades. And now he's got some new initiatives, and I wanted to talk to him about it on the Strang Report today. So let me start by asking this. There are many things that need to be restored in America. This is one of your themes. Tell us about what they are.
Well, first, Steve, thank you so much for having me. I have been admiring you, Charisma Magazine, and your work for years as well. So it's an honor to be here with you. Well, look, first and foremost is a restoration of the Judeo-Christian culture and heritage and values that we inherited from our founding fathers. I really believe that the key to America's success as the most prosperous, the most free, the most innovative and inventive nation the world has ever seen has been that the founding fathers and the early settlers rooted and grounded our country in faith in God first and foremost as the ultimate grantor of rights and liberty. And I really believe God has honored that. Not that we've been a perfect country, we've never made any mistakes, but I believe that God has honored the fact that this country was rooted and grounded in him. And Steve, I'm convinced if we allow forces that are at work today to eliminate that from our culture or to suppress that in such a way that it is no longer predominant, we lose America as we know it, and our precipitous decline really begins. So that's the first thing, restoring the Judeo-Christian culture. In fact, that's our organization, that's its mission, to restore that culture, to preserve, to defend it by bringing people together across racial and cultural lines so we end this division and function as one nation under God.
And you have several initiatives. One of them is called STAND. Tell us what its mission is and tell us what STAND stands for.
Right. STAND is the organizational umbrella, and STAND is an acronym for Staying True to America's National Destiny. STAND. You know, God gave me that in 2009. We were founded on July 4th of 2009. And God gave me that after President Obama was elected, because I really believe that he was a president who didn't understand American culture and history. I mean, after all, he did spend most of his time growing up here in Indonesia and Hawaii, really never experienced America the way I think most people do, and had a perspective that I thought was really oddly foreign in the way he looked at the country. And I was praying about that and about, Lord, what do we do to make sure that we stay true to what you intended us to be? And God gave me that acronym, Staying True to America's National Destiny. And by the way, Steve, that destiny, I really believe, is in God. I believe that America is indeed a providential nation and that he intended us to be a nation that would more than any other reflect the kingdom of God. People from all over the world, every background, every ancestry, every skin color, just people coming together, not united by demography or ethnicity, but united by principle. And I really believe that's what God intended. And that's the destiny for our country. That's what makes us a shining city on a hill. That's what makes us the nation that people all over the world want to get to and aspire to get to. And so we want to be true to that destiny, because I really believe that was God's plan for America. And there are people, I think, desperately trying to divorce us and disconnect us from that destiny.
Well, America is a great country, even though there are many people who talk about how evil it is and play up every shortcoming. But if it's so bad, why do millions of people risk everything to come here legally or illegally? And there's so many things we can unpack, and I want to talk about some of the crime waves recently and different things your ministry is doing. But tell me about Project 76. And before our podcast is over today, I want you to tell people how they can really get involved.
Absolutely. Project 76, again, we are a Christian organization. We're not a racial organization. We're not a denominational organization, but we are a Christian organization, and we are a patriotic organization. And so God gave me this Project 76 idea as I was praying about the future of our organization. We're 16 years old now, and we've continued to grow. And I was praying, saying, Lord, what next? What do you want us to focus on? And God showed me, Steve, something I'd never seen before, that counting July 4th, Independence Day, to September 17th, Constitution Day, is exactly 76 days. exactly 76 days. That's really that's really odd. I never realized that, and I don't think the founders planned it that way. I really believe that's the mark of God's hand on our country, and so I came up then with this idea of Project 76, where we take that 76 days and make it a time of reflection and prayer on what God has given us. See, because I'm not bragging with some kind of inappropriate pride about our country. I do love this country, but I'm really expressing gratitude for what God has given us, Steve. I think that's the appropriate approach. And so in Project 76, we've asked people for three things: to pray for our country and pray for our organization, to volunteer, to help us. We're trying to start chapters all over the country. We've got a few now, but we're looking to establish a lot more. And of course, to give, because our organization, like any other, needs funding in order to do the things that God has called us to do. And on Constitution Day, September 17th, an interesting fact, Steve, I've done research on this because I'm trying to figure out, well, how do people feel about Constitution Day? Only 15% of Americans even know that the Constitution was passed on September 17th. Only 15%. 85% of the American people don't even know when the Constitution was passed. And it's the document that is our supreme legal document in the country. And so on Constitution Day, we're going to have a 10-hour live stream all day long with various guests talking about all of these values that the Constitution represents and from which it springs, those Judeo-Christian values, principles like family, restoring the family, like respect for law enforcement, like individual liberty over ethnic and racial identity, and all of these things. So we're going to have a wonderful day to sort of cap off Project 76 on Constitution Day, September 17th. It'll go from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. so people can tune in all day long as they have an opportunity to see what we're talking about. And they can go to standamerica.us to find out more about STAND and more about Project 76 and Constitution Day.
The Constitution is so important because it really indicates the beginning of our country. Most of us think it's July 4th, 1776, but that was the Declaration of Independence, which was a vital step. But then we had to win a war, and we had to go through the first few years in which the government just really floundered around, and finally they settled on the Constitution. So, my hat off to you for playing that up, because you're right. Most Americans don't really know. They don't even really know American history. A lot of people don't. And I'm a history buff.
Amen.
And
Yes.
so it's hard for me to understand it, but I'm thankful that organizations like yours are doing it. So let me ask you this. In my research about your ministry, I came across the Family Restoration Institute. That's understand. I don't mean to understand. That is under your organization STAND. But tell us about it.
Well, the biggest social problem, Steve, that we have in America is not race, and it's not poverty, and it's not even the economy. The biggest problem we have in America is the breakdown of the family. For example, in Washington, D.C. right now, where they're talking about all this crime that's going on, 70% of the Black children born in Washington, D.C. are born out of wedlock. 77%. Half the children born across the board are born out of wedlock. And the crime is being committed. Everybody's talking about the crime being committed by these young men. These young men are being raised in single parent, female-headed households. They have no father to teach them what is right, to teach them what is wrong, and to show them respect for authority and what it truly means to be a man. And I really believe that as we come toward the 250th anniversary of our country and we celebrate a quarter of a millennium of America's existence, with all the things we're going to focus on, we've got to focus on restoring the family. That's why we recreated the Family Restoration Institute, because we really believe that we've got to do almost, in a sense, what God did for the children of Israel in the wilderness when he said, well, I'm going to raise up a generation that will have a vision for the promised land and will want to go into it. Because we've got a whole generation that we've raised up confused about gender, confused about life, confused about what it means to be a healthy, wholesome family. And we've got to reinstill those values. And that's what the Family Restoration Institute is dedicated to doing, trying to rebuild that. We have a school called the Maximum Potential Christian Academy. And it's amazing, Steve, the tragic stories of children who in some ways are disadvantaged most because of the family that they're in. And this is the seedbed of all other kinds of pathologies: suicide, drug addiction, gang involvement, crime, prison, all of it springing from a breakdown of the family. We solve that problem, we're gonna solve a whole lot of other social problems as well.
Well, good for you. And I agree with you. And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some things that some people would consider controversial, but I know you well enough to know that you're an expert on this. And I want to talk about these things having to do with family and race. And I'm old enough to remember the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Down here in Florida, I went to segregated schools for 5 years because that's the way things were. They integrated schools when I was in high school. So I remember that era very well. But when I've recently read some statistics, well, first of all, the Civil Rights Bill needed to be passed. And one of the big things that happened, anyone who knows history, is that there were events that took place down here in Florida in St. Augustine that helped its passage. And systemic racism, not being able to go to a school, not being able to eat at a restaurant, not being able to hold certain kind of jobs, that kind of racism is gone. Unfortunately, there's still racism. But here's the question. I read that before the Civil Rights Bill was passed in 1964, the percentage of children born in a stable two-parent family in the Black community was very high. And there were other things about respect and all that kind of stuff that seems to go by the wayside. And part of it is the breakdown of the family. But why do you think that that's happened? Because it would have been very difficult during the days of Jim Crow laws and segregation to flourish. Yet in some ways, the Black community did.
Well, listen, Steve, I am a walking poster child for controversy, so I never shy away from it. In fact, I said at a Juneteenth event I was asked to speak at, I said, even slavery did not destroy the Black family, because my great-grandparents were slaves and then sharecroppers in Orange County, Virginia. They were married before slavery ended. They remained married afterwards. They raised my grandfather and his siblings. I said it took liberals in the 1960s to come up with a scheme to destroy the Black family. And people just went berserk over that comment, but it's the truth. You said it was high. The out of wedlock birth in the Black community in 1950 was only about 10%. Almost 90% of Black children were born to a two-parent married monogamous family. And the real precipitous drop didn't begin until 1965 with the passage of the Great Society program. And you start tracking it every 5 to 10 years from there on, and the drop is absolutely cataclysmic. Till now, we've got the reverse of that. We've got in a place like Richmond, for example, you've got almost 90% of children being born out of wedlock instead of 90% of Black children being born in wedlock. And I think it's because of these societal programs that somehow stepped in to try to be God and try to be father and try to engineer what they thought was best for the Black family. And you end up with policies that told women, we'll give you more money, not only for having more babies, but for not having a man in the home. And it just engendered an attitude that says, well, we have to figure out a way to work the system. And that way ended up really causing a tremendous degeneration in personal responsibility. And you're right, there were a lot of things that were better during desegregation. And I know people are going to think I'm saying that segregation was bad, was good. I'm not saying that at all. I don't believe in that. But I think the level of independence and the level of personal responsibility that was required ended up creating a very healthy attitude about life. What we have to do for ourselves. And a lot of that was completely undermined by the Great Society program and the welfare system. And that's part of what's got to be undone. And I'm hoping that President Trump and other presidents coming along will realize that and help us to rebuild the Black family in America.
Well, I remember Lyndon Baines Johnson and his Great Society and all the things he did. And if you study his life, as I have, you know that really he was a racist. He was a racist from Texas. he said some horrible things. He said if they pass the civil rights bill, they'll have the black vote locked up for generations. And in a way, he was prophetic. But before him, or maybe going back to the Depression era and Roosevelt and so forth, 98, maybe 100% of the black community was Republican. And the reason was simple. The Democratic Party favored slavery, fought the Union to keep slavery, enacted the Jim Crow laws and so forth. And of course, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, who is a great emancipator. So, why don't more people in the black community understand the hypocrisy? Because there are a lot of blacks. There are conservative blacks, but it's a fairly small percentage. And it always frustrates me when I hear someone like Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who's one of the great leaders of our generation, black or white, but they didn't even put him in the museum in Washington, D.C. about black history. Why is that? And what is it going to take to shift things in America?
Well, Steve, this is something your audience and you and I understand that the world at large might not. I think what has happened is a spiritual stronghold has set in and created a kind of spiritual blindness for the truth. You know, it's interesting. You say you're a history buff, so am I. I'm not an expert, but I do love history and I study it. You know, the Democrat Party created the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was an enforcement terroristic arm of the Democrat Party. And the Democrat Party is always interested in taking us back to history, but they never tell that part. They never tell their part in the perpetuation of slavery. And in my view, while the organization style has changed, I believe that the spirit of that organization has not changed because there's still an attitude of ownership and of manipulation and of use of the black community for their own purposes. Just like Joe Biden said, if you don't vote for me, quote unquote, you ain't black. I mean, so how arrogant do you have to be to make a statement like that? Well, as arrogant as a slave master, right? So you are absolutely right. But I think there are more conservatives, by the way, either labeled as such, announcing themselves as such or not. But the thing is, you know this, Steve, they don't want it. The mainstream media doesn't want to hear from us. They want us censored. They want us silenced because they don't want people to think we exist. They don't want to talk about Booker T. Washington. They want to talk about W.E.B. Du Bois because, you know, he was the collectivist and Booker T. Washington was the individualist who said, sit down your buckets where you are, get busy, work, make a life for yourself. And I really believe that that's the ethic that has caused so many in the black community to enjoy the opportunities that this nation has to offer. I was musing recently about the fact that Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and these gangster rappers, who I'm no fan of, by the way, never bought or listened to their music, but nevertheless, these guys start out talking about how bad the country is and how much they're hated and they're all multi-millionaires many times over in this country that they claim was so oppressive. So, this is the greatest country on earth for anybody to live, regardless of their skin color. And let me just say one quick thing, Steve. I don't want to go on with this, but the other thing is America is not unique in this because it was the order of the day that people were subjugated. Reasons were given for the justification of that subjugation, and race had nothing to do with it. It was just another iteration of the attitude of fallen humanity trying to take advantage of other human beings. And when you put it in that context, you can just realize, okay, we made the same mistake other human beings have made and other countries have made, but praise God, we came out of it like no other country ever has.
Well, slavery is the great shame of our great country. And the Civil War is something that almost tore us apart, and we're still paying the consequences of slavery and that terrible ordeal that we went through. But let's talk about the parties. I'm really no fan of the Republican Party. I've been a registered Democrat down here in Florida and now a registered Republican because I feel I have no choice. I tend to think that, some people call it the uniparty, but some strides have been made, mainly with Donald Trump. Who would have thought that Donald Trump would get as much backing of the Black community, but there's a lot of people that are kind of waking up and realize that they've been taken for granted, they've been used, they've been manipulated, and what they want to do is live the American dream. They want to work hard, they want to be rewarded for their effort and so forth. And Donald Trump and the America that he espouses teaches that, preaches that. So what are your thoughts about this?
Steve, let me just take a moment because your audience wouldn't know. I think you probably know this about my background. I was born into a broken home. I was raised in foster care and in poverty. My foster parents were not semi-illiterate. That's like they were completely illiterate. My foster father could only make an X for his name. My foster mother could sign her name. Neither of them could read or write otherwise. I was a gang member by the age of 10 years old and a street kid because I was angry and resentful that my parents were not taking care of me. And at 10 years old, my father re-entered my life and took me out of foster care and changed the trajectory of my life dramatically by imposing discipline and vision and expectation on me. I went from being an F student in 5th grade to an A student in 6th grade, went on to join the Marine Corps, graduated from college, summa cum laude, on to Harvard Law School, Harvard Divinity School, written 3 books. Now, when my life changed, the world didn't suddenly change around me, and whatever racism was around me didn't suddenly change. What changed was I realized I had something to offer, and it was up to me to make the most of the opportunities that I had. And my father wasn't willing to accept anything less. And so, really, what we've got to do, and I think this is what President Trump is trying to do, create an opportunity economy where everybody has a chance. You got to go out there and work. You got to strive for it. You got to get after it. But it's there more than any other place in the world. And I think this president is being supported by an increasing number of Black folks and Hispanic folks and others because they realize he is ultimately for our country and for our fellow, all of our citizens, and creating an opportunity for all of us to grow and thrive and prosper. That's what I love about this country. We're not perfect. We know that. But if you compare us to any other nation in the world, Steve, I'm taking America. Thank you very much. I'm not going anywhere because I know this is the greatest place for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren until Jesus comes.
Well said. Let me ask you about other clergy. One of the great institutions in the Black community that has survived over the decades has been the Black church. And there's some great leaders. In fact, many of the leaders in the civil rights movement came out of the Black church.
Mhm.
But I know I have personal friends who lead great churches. They preach the gospel. They pray for the sick. They cast out demons, and they vote Democrat. And they won't speak up about the moral issues of the day because I guess they don't want to get hassled. Help me understand and help my viewers understand why this happens and what will be necessary to get more Black leaders, especially preachers, involved.
Well, look, this is not going to sound very nice, but it's the truth. They are victims of the same idolatry that the antebellum church was victim to, which is racial ideology supplanting biblical theology. They bought into the idea that somehow their religion was authentic by promoting this notion that there was something special about white people and that Black people had a certain role in life and that God sanctioned that and that was the way it was. And so I said they turned Christianity really into a racial cult, a racial religion. And sadly, we've got some Black churches in America that have done that have done the same thing. They've turned Christianity into a racial cult. It's all about the evils of white people and the things that they are doing, and they're responsible for whatever problems one has in life. And really, it's a false gospel, frankly, manipulated and used by political forces that know if you keep people thinking that way, you can A, hold them down, and B, you can keep them under your control and keep them supporting you and keeping you in power. And so people like me are speaking up. I'm not the only one, obviously, but are speaking up sometimes to the anger and consternation of others. But sometimes I've had this happen many times. People have come to me and said, I've never thought about it the way you explained it. And you've really changed my life by explaining it to me this way, because frankly, they're not getting the truth in very many places. So I say the key to it is keep promoting the truth and telling it to everybody you can. And I really believe God is in the process, frankly, of waking people up. And I believe President Trump, oddly enough, like you said, who would have thought, but President Trump is part of that awakening.
You mentioned earlier that you have written several books. I want you to tell us about your latest one, Sweet Land of Liberty. What's it about, and how can people get it?
Yeah, it is my favorite. My other two books are theological, and this book is really historical and biographical, and also it's sort of a policy book. I wrote it as a tribute to my country, to say, look, I am a descendant of slaves. You would think, how can you be a patriot? I'm a patriot because I understand slavery in the context of human history, and I understand my place in this country in the context of the sovereignty of Almighty God. I say to audiences all over the country when I have a chance, Steve, if you're Irish and your ancestors came during the potato famine, or you're Italian and your ancestors came to escape oppression, or you're German and your ancestors came to escape wars, or you're African, you're a person of African descent, your ancestors came to escape, were brought here by slavery. None of that is the real reason why you're here. The real reason why you're here is Acts 17:26. He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and determine their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, that they might seek the Lord. That God assembled us to be a nation. He's called us here. We have a calling. And so I attribute Sweet Land of Liberty as a tribute to God's sovereignty in our lives and bringing us to this great nation. I said, my ancestors didn't experience what I've experienced, but God knew that I would experience it. And God knew that generations to come would have those opportunities. And he saw beyond all that. And yes, God's not the author of slavery, but God used slavery to put Joseph where he needed to be. And so he's used various things to bring us all to this wonderful country. And we've got to come together to preserve it.
Well, thank you for staying tuned. I have a few closing comments. First of all, please subscribe to the Strang Report. If you don't, please do so, and hit the little bell so you're notified when we have something new online. Also, give us a thumbs up. That helps us. Somehow it works into the algorithm. I don't understand all that stuff, but I like to remind people to do it. I'm so grateful for Bishop E.W. Jackson. He's doing such important work with his ministry called Stand. You can connect with his ministry at standamerica.us. And you can get his book, Sweet Land of Liberty, on Amazon or wherever Christian books are sold. And share this with someone that you know would be interested in it. He said so many things that need to have a wider audience, and you can help us get there. Again, thank you for watching the Strang Report. Until next time, God bless you.